Have you ever wondered what makes creative people tick? Where do their ideas come from? What keeps them energized? What kinds of things get in their way? Is their life really as much fun as it looks from the outside? Hello, I'm your host, Lili Pierpont, and this is ArtStorming, a podcast about how ideas become paintings or poems, performances, or collections. Each episode, I'll chat with a guest from the arts community, and we'll explore how the most creative among us stare down a blank canvas or reach into the void and create something new. In our inaugural season, ArtStorming the City Different, we dipped our toes into the vast ocean of creativity with a focus on some of our favorite creators of Santa Fe, New Mexico. That conversation was enjoyed by artists and non-artists alike, because it showed us how we can all benefit from learning how to generate something from nothing, dream bigger, charter new territories, and solve problems in new ways. In Season 2, we're going to take that concept of generating our lives with intention to the next level. This season, we're talking about legacy, art as legacy, and how the most creative among us tackle this rich and deeply personal subject. Welcome to ArtStorming, the Art of Remembrance. Today, we're talking to a man who is fundamentally shifting the DNA of dance education. Francisco Gella, the artistic director of Zeitgeist Dance Theater, is doing something much bigger than just choreographing steps. While his work, like the one that I saw, a masterpiece called Lineage, is breathtaking, his true project is the dancers themselves. Francisco's on a mission to redefine what legacy looks like in the dance world. He's moving away from old school focus on creating technical performers, and instead, he's nurturing whole human beings. He's teaching young artists how to bring authentic selves to the stage, how to honor their heritage, how to build the mental fortitude to handle whatever life throws at them. It's about creating legacies that don't just live in the theater, but in the lives of the people who walk across the stage. So let's dive into this conversation about how art and life intertwine. Today, I'm ArtStorming with Francisco Gella. And I saw your rehearsal performance this summer, and then I went down to Albuquerque and saw it. What was the name of that performance?
It's called Lineage.
Lineage.
And
Well,
it was about the Trujillo family from Chimayó weavers, and it was specifically about their daughter, an 8th-generation weaver named Emily Trujillo. So that was what the work was about, and it was part of the UNESCO celebration for Santa Fe as being designated as a creative cities designation by UNESCO. And, they gave us a grant to create this work, which I would never normally do a piece about weaving because it's not the kind of thing that normally inspires me, but it really changed the way I looked at myself and my art and my process, because I did research and I'm like, wow, weaving is actually exactly like dance. It's just on a much slower capacity, but so many things in common. Music, rhythm, mathematics, pattern, choreography, design. She's inspired by music, so there's musicality involved. So it was challenging, but I came out of it a changed person.
it was so extraordinary. And I've seen a lot of dance, and I know I said this to you and some of the other people who were there, but the rehearsal that I saw was impressive enough as it was. But when I saw the actual performance in Albuquerque, I was blown away. And I've seen a lot of dance, but to see that many performers on stage, all becoming part of the warp and weft of the fabric that you were creating, it was absolutely one of the most inspiring pieces of dance choreography I think I've ever seen. And it was because of all those things you said. And it was because of not only did you capture just the actual act of weaving, but this idea of lineage, and that the thread is this ongoing thing that connects generation to generation. I saw it, it was like screaming lineage. Of course, I forgot that the name of the piece was Lineage,
Yes.
but it screamed lineage, it screamed legacy. And so that's when I knew I just had to have you on the show.
I appreciate that. It's interesting because I'm the artistic director of Zeitgeist Dance Theater, which is a professional and training company here, contemporary dance company here that we started in 2020 over the pandemic. So the name of the company is Zeitgeist Dance Theater. We only have a summer season. And it's real, when we started this company, we were doing more works that really reflected what was happening in society and socially, and also, I don't want to say politically, but definitely like, getting the feeling like the year before that, I did a piece about protest, not specifically about any kind of protest, just the act of protest.
Yeah.
And so this lineage was actually, in a way, really a nice segue into a different process that forced me to really do research about the family. And it was really, really incredible to see how she was inspired by just, by K-pop music. That's why there was a K-pop section in that whole thing, because we needed to make sure that it played into it. And then she talks about her grandfather. And that's when, that one of the dancers came out with the ribbons attached to her, and all the dancers and the colors were being manipulated. So that was symbolic too, about how when we went into her studio and I saw how she was working, that was the first thing that came into mind. It was like, my gosh, although she's here as a human, like symbolically, there's all these threads attached to her process, her artistry, the way she thought about how she would weave. In fact, she actually was weaving at the time when I met her in the studio, like a divorce breakup piece. And it was about like a K-pop song about her divorce, like basically like talking about a breakup. But she was at that time breaking up with her ex-husband now. So it was kind of interesting to see her do that. And I saw like half of it done. And then she finally completed it after we performed the piece, because it took another 6 months to get it done. And, when you think about the process, it's just like, I could never be a weaver because I don't have that kind of patience. Like to create things and then see it,
Right.
see it right away. And even if it's not quite performed, like it took about 2.5 weeks to create this 42-minute work with 44 dancers. And there's a loom that there was a lot of research that came about it. Honestly, I actually was so overwhelmed. But I always get reminded by Tim Gunn from Project Runway, right? You make it work. And
Right.
so I think for people that don't even know, just a little bit of background drama at the dress rehearsal, the costumes were actually literally falling off of the dancers. And it was a mess. Like while they were dancing, so like it was emergency time. 2 hours before the show, I said, pin all this stuff, do what you need to do, hairspray, whatever, tie it around. And then I knew the dancers were upset because they did not have a good run for the dress rehearsal. So when we did a circle before we actually did the show, I could see the end of the dancers' eyes, and I'm like, it's redemption time. Like that was ridiculous that we couldn't dance the way we could normally dance. So when they went out and did that show, there was a conviction and a grit that was part of it. And they were so in it because to make up for the fact that they had a bad run in dress rehearsal, which was a few hours before we were about to premiere the work. And I was like nervous, but we ended up coming together and, we made it work. And
Well, what incredible training for these kids to go on and become professionals,
yes.
because if that isn't an example of what can happen
Oh,
in
it happens a
professional
lot.
circumstances, right?
Yeah, there are always things that happens a lot. Like, you can't run the piece because, there was one time I was in like Philadelphia, the power went out in the theater. And then I went to South Korea and it was like, okay, we were doing a performance and it snowed and there was snow on stage and it was outdoor. And I'm like, it wasn't supposed to be that cold. And, the weather dropped. And so, you just have to be able to, the show must go on, right? That's
Right.
how we're taught. That's how we're trained. Yeah.
Well, there's so many layers to this, because it's like the legacy, teaching these kids, how to dance as a metaphor for life, and how to dance through life, and how to dance through adversity, and how to dance through hiccups, and all of these wonderful reasons that dance is one of my favorite art forms. But you said you were changed by it. So say a little bit more about how it changed you and how you think it changed these kids.
I think for me, I always, at least in my life, I always believe that when you do something that you don't necessarily like or are passionate about, and you're forced to have to do something, you take your skill set and apply that to a subject matter that you may not be passionate about. And what happened there is because, I had to do my job. Because we got a grant. So, this is part of the process. Sometimes as choreographers, we don't always get to choreograph what we want. And for the season, the limitation was that. And I think what happened there for me is that I really dove into the history of the family and, like how Chimayó weaving came into existence and how many generations there were. And I learned about the looms and also just the process. Like Lisa Trujillo talks about not being part of that family, being an outsider, being, Jewish and a person not of color, not of New Mexican roots, have to go into that and feeling, being an outsider and then literally like having to, she fell in love with the art form and she became brilliant at it. And she talked about that process. And so there was so much about what she said about her history, about the tenacity, patience, and the grit to have to understand how to be able to fix a pattern when things don't work, but also how her own experience and her resilience led to her having so much knowledge. It inspired me. And so I dove in deeper and really listened carefully. In fact, when we hired the composer, we made sure that some of Emily's voices were used in the soundtrack
Oh,
because,
yeah.
because she needed to talk about the process, about her legacy. And so for me, the question was, how do we represent these different elements without breaking the bank? And that's how we came up with that loom. Instead of having a big wooden structure, we just had, these poles and then had like a 15-foot canvas, material. And we were like, let's do 8 of them. And that's how we were able to play and made it look like the dancers were being interspersed into that particular prop. And then the dancers, I think, had never done a full length work before. Like the majority of them maybe had done a piece, a maximum, maybe 10 minutes. So for them to be able to focus on a 6-section work to original pieces of music, all different. My, the composer, his name is Ryan. He really, I'm like so bad with names. I'm thinking about when I'm like thinking about multiple things, but he ended up composing it to her voice, to Emily's voice. And each section had a different feel to it because it had a different particular theme to it. And the dancers really had to learn how to be clear about the information and how the intention at each section fit into this larger work. And so I think for them, what they learned out of this was endurance and focusing on a larger scale and being focused and being in it, not just for 10 minutes. Like, oh, I'm doing this opening section, which is about, the legacy, and I'm doing this about pattern. And they had to change it up when they did the K-pop section. And when the loom came, the loom section was mathematically so complicated, Lily. I can even tell you, like, we tried to count that music. It was virtually impossible. I'm like, oh, there's an 8 here, and a 9, and a 7. And finally, one of my colleagues, Vladimir Kondahishi, who is our artistic associate now, he said, you can hear the music go boom and boom. And so we ended up listening instead of counting because, but that's what they do. Like they count when they weave. So we were trying to find a solution for something that actually didn't work. And so instead of counting, we listened.
So
the dancers learned different strategies of how to be able to solve an issue and individuality, timing, with different strategies. Like in this case, we didn't count, we listened. This other section with the blankets, we listened, yes, and we counted, but it was mostly about visual cue. So like that person can't go until this person goes. So like if the person before us comes in late, the rest of the work is pretty much off. And so we learned how to be able to really get in tune with each other as a company, which I think was important. So when you have a company of 44, like you have 4 professionals and the rest are trainees, it's a little bit of a dysfunctional family. I don't want to say too dysfunctional. Everybody loves dance. So when we go into the space, everybody's there. But you have your clicks, right? When you're outside of the studio. But when we came into the studio, we really learned and unified. And the work unified us. And the complications and the many things that went wrong unified us. And I could see it in the dancer's eyes. It's like, we have to make this work. And so they would discuss, what if you did this? It just became such an incredible team effort that to me, I think the dancers learned to let go of me, 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 me. And instead of thinking about me, 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 they thought us, we. You know what I mean? And so I think that was the most important lesson that they took, but also endurance and focus was the biggest thing that they got out of it. I know that they were really taken when we brought the Trujillo family on stage, and some of them were crying because Lisa said, I cannot believe that you made everybody in the audience understand why we love our art form so much. It was the biggest gift. And so when the dancers heard that and when the family was taken, they were emotional. And I think changed them. It changed the way they see different arts that are art forms that are not, maybe they're not passionate about. But I think because they affected the life of this legendary and iconic family of weaving in Chimayó, and they were so, and it was received emotionally by that family, those dancers would change and were changed by that.
I want to take another minute to remind you listeners that ArtStorming is a listener-supported nonprofit, and we need your help to keep the conversation going. Every dollar goes directly into programs that support our mission. That means more compelling stories, more in-depth articles, and a greater impact on our community. If you love what you hear, please consider making a contribution. Visit our website for more ways to engage, and thank you for being an essential part of our work.
Yeah, well, and as a member of the audience, one of the things, as somebody, as I said, who's watched a lot of dance, I think what made it so good is when you see a company like Alvin Ailey and, they are so good at what they do. And even when they've performed the same choreography 100 times and the same principal dancers and they make it new and fresh, what made your performance so incredible was maybe because it was that attentiveness to being in the moment that what made it so real for the audience. We were just as riveted and we were so engaged as audience members because there was so much attention paid to each other on the stage. And so it made it a very captivating performance.
Yeah. And I will take that comparison, Lily, to Alvin Ailey. Thank you. Because that's, we only had 10 dancers from the year before come back. So the rest of them were new. So to be able to have to come together in a 2.5-week creation period to premiere that third week, it's a very short amount of time, but we're in the studio from 9 to 6 and it is intense and we get to know each other, but they also come into the space already vetted. Like we make sure that we interview each of the dancers before we allow them to come into our dance company space because we want to make sure that they are right mind and soul. And I think the common denominator that is present in all of our dancers that we assemble during this time is they're humble, they're teachable, they love the art form, they have grit, they are always wanting to learn something new. They want to be physically challenged, they want to be emotionally challenged, but also in the end, they want to be empowered and inspired. Part of the process of this company is to inspire these dancers to also find out more about who they are individually. But it's through a collective process. But because of that collective process, they understand more of who they are individually. And it sounds very weird. That's kind of a little bit of a juxtaposition, but it's so true. It's like I tell dancers, you cannot be a good improvisationalist unless you have great ballet training, because you have to be able to deconstruct from somewhere to be able to make your choices. So that's where your training comes from, like a modern and ballet, where you have that. And if you do contemporary, you get something to basically divorce yourself in a way from, because you have a reference point of how to be able to make something so structured and create something new in your body. And so I think I believe in this weird conundrum of juxtapositions, because for me, it's like I actually had to make my process simple to create this very complicated full-length 42-minute work. I relied on, my mathematics. I relied on my instinct. I relied on very simple things. And when you're choreographing in a large group, you can't have as much intricacy because it gets messy. And I think, there's a couple of parts in there where I wish I changed, honestly, because I was like, okay, that's too messy, but I didn't have time to fix it. But I don't think I think, for me, it's the standard that I put myself always is to push for a much cleaner look and a very polished look. But I think for this one, if it was a tiny bit messy in some sections, I think it kind of plays itself out to sometimes, threads, they run, right? You have these things, and sometimes it doesn't always work out. So I think it lent itself into the process. But thank you for saying that, because we work so hard to make sure that the dancers that come into our company space understand what that is, and there's expectation, but also they are so part of the process. I see them not just as instruments I work with, I see them as humans, the human
Yeah.
being, and what they can bring into the space. And a lot of the times I relied on my instinct, and I can sense the room when things aren't working, so I would change it up quickly. And instead of trying to force it to work, and because I just what, let it go, let's work on this, and then another solution would come and it would actually be better. So we all learn how to work together. And also, even if I'm the director and the choreographer, I was also a student in this process. And so it was trying to manage all these different facets and factors to be able to create this work. And I am so happy that you enjoyed it, because there was so much put into this. And I mean, I didn't sleep for 3 weeks, basically, because every night when I go to bed, an idea would come. It would come at 3 a.m. I would wake up and I can't go back to sleep, and I would have to write notes. And it's like, I was exhausted, but I was also exhilarated.
Yeah, well, that section, and when I came to the rehearsal, I think you had just given them the K-pop on point routine or
Yes,
whatever.
yes.
Oh
Yeah.
my God, that was like K-pop on point. I mean, just that juxtaposition was just, I've seen rap on point, but K-pop on point was like a whole new universe for me.
Yeah, I mean, we just try to play with different things. And, the concern for me is is it going to be tacky? It's going to work. I've been in this art form now, for 33 years now, 3 decades. I started out late, but I've seen and danced for 4 different companies. I've worked with some incredible choreographers myself. So I think I understand what a taste level needs to be. But sometimes, like the K-pop section, for instance, I was just like, okay, this can be cute, but it can't be tacky. And
Yeah.
so I actually relied on, okay, guys, what are the current moves? Okay, what are the current moves here? What are the hot things? Let's K-pop it out, this movement. Let's play around with it. Let's make it be fun, because it's going to go from really super fun and really more about everybody dances together to an emotional section that talks about her grandfather. And that's when the ribbons came out. And so I think 2 different elements coming together, although I thought, is this going to work? At first I was doubting it. And then when I saw the section, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's an emotional, a thorough line where you feel that joy. And then and then all of a sudden you go into something of a memory, and you're forced to have to go into that emotional capacity. So the switch, the quick, pulling the rug underneath with what people are thinking, where it could be going, the unpredictability of that, and the quick switch actually worked. I was concerned it didn't, but then after we saw it and rehearsed it, and mind you, that costume did not get done until the second week. So we were rehearsing it, pretending like there were things. They were ribbons attached to the body. And, when we finally put together, I was like, wow, I really thought that this wasn't going to work, and the juxtaposition worked. So those are the things that were the tidbits that I found so interesting, that were really valuable. And, now it's like, oh, I can take an idea and I can put it together. Like now when I choreograph, I'm not afraid to make a choice like that, and understand that it could be this feeling. It doesn't have to always have a thorough line, but then the second part of the piece could be completely different, and it could work together.
Well, again, what I love about this so much is that it's the metaphor for life, and that these kids are learning how to approach life, their dance, and life in a way that is very spontaneous, because they have to be able to literally pivot figuratively and in a moment, or to a new bit of music, or a new concept, or a new theme, or a new emotion. And part of what the reason that we're doing this whole series is to really introduce the general public to how an artist thinks and how an artist moves through life. And whether we're talking about staring down a blank canvas, or whether we're talking about creating choreography, movement through space and time, there are all these decisions that have to be made in the moment, deliberate. And what's cool about dance is that once, like music, is once it's been choreographed, you get to do it again and again, and there are these different iterations of it. Whereas a painting, is kind of done once, but it gives you even more capacity to do that spontaneous thing with life as it's coming at you. You might have choreography in mind, but new circumstances, snow on the stage or whatever it is, it's coming at you.
It's interesting you say that because, like I have several pieces that are out, like Philadelphia Dance Company is doing my Vivaldi. They've been touring it all over the world. It's called Seasons. And I originally choreographed it in 2022, touring it, but it's with a different cast. And it's interesting to see how the new cast is receiving the steps that I made with a different group of artists, dancers, because it's always a challenge when you're working with dancers and you're creating it on them specifically. And those dancers, half of them leave the company, and then there's new dancers coming in, and they have to acquire that information, but that information wasn't made on them. That's part of the job too of a dancer, right? You have to be able to take information, make it your own, even if it wasn't made on you. And so I think the challenge, and I always ask myself, if we were to reset this work with a different group, would it have the same feeling? And that's the part that's challenging, because if you have a different group and maybe they don't have the understanding because they're just now, it's a reset as opposed to creating it on them originally.
Right, because they're not part of the co-creation of the original.
They're trying to make them fit into a narrative that they weren't part of creating. And so I think that that's the part where it gets challenging. But I think as a rehearsal director as well, trying to talk to them about the instances and the facets that make the work what it is. And although it's not an original creation, I think taking them back there, that's where video really helps, because they can see what the dancers were doing and how they're performing it. I always wondered, like, way back when we didn't have videos and they did La Ban notation, like, how did they replicate these works? And I think it was the word of mouth of the artist that it was created on. And then they would give that information to the new dancer and the new generation that will be dancing that same work that was created 70 years ago. And I noticed that as each generation, it loses a particular grit and impact. Like when you do a Martha Graham solo, and and it was created in 1940. And so the dancers in 1950 and all this stuff earlier will do it better. And as each generation comes in and the times change and society and culture changes, what's important for that generation is reflected on that work. And sometimes there's a little bit of a disconnect.
Do you think that has something to do with the fact that companies are changing members a lot more rapidly now than they would have in that time frame, wouldn't they? I mean, a company would have been selected and stay together for quite some time with a few rotations in and out, but it's different now, right?
I think the work loses its potency when the energy of the creator, the further you are from the energy of the creator, the more the work loses its potency, because the interpretations of each dancer that has done that work is also influenced by what's happening in current culture. Although I had to say that we're kind of at an interesting point, because the dancers now are superhuman. They can do more than the dancers that used to do it 50 years ago. But what is missing is a life force and a conviction. I was watching this one show with Jay Jameson. They were doing a piece by an artist called Jowley. I forgot the name of the work, but they did it in Donahue. They did it. Alvin Ailey was on Donahue, right? Like, if any of you remember who Donahue is, still Donahue.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I saw it on a clip on Instagram. And one of them was my former rehearsal director, Deborah Chase Hicks, bless her heart. She's no longer with us. And they did this work, and I was watching it through Instagram. I was blown away. I was blown away about it. It was about, like, homelessness and like how, we're dealing with all these different, it's called shelter. It's a piece called Shelter. Homelessness, and how we're not doing anything to resolve it. We're still not doing anything to resolve it, right? It's crazy. But when I saw that it was in the 80s, I was like, they danced as if it was their last day on earth. There was a conviction that was there that I feel like dancers nowadays are missing. But with me understanding that, I also am very much aware of what the issue is. And so when I talked to the dancers, I said, I know you have Instagram, you have all this stuff, but you have to take the culmination of training and you work how many hours a week? Some of us are in the studio for 10, 20, 30, 40 hours a week. You know what I mean? I know 40 hours a week, like some kids actually do that. It's like a full-time job. They're there 80 hours, a minimum, maybe like 40 hours to 80 hours a month. I said, when you have learned and you have been trained for all that time, when you get to perform this work, I want to see the culmination of that training. You're living out all of your training on stage for that moment. And so that's why I remind you of the effort and the time that you committed. And that's why I feel like when I talk to my dancers and they understand that, there's never really any kind of hesitancy about approaching the stage. They just go for it. In fact, I saw that in the dress rehearsal when they were falling apart because costumes were falling off of them. And I could tell they were upset that they did not have a good run. So when we did our circle before the actual premiere, I saw it in their eyes. I'm like, it's about to go down. We're doing this. And I love feeling that energy because I felt like they needed to make up for, a bad run before the world premiere. And when they danced, I was looking in the back and I was in tears because I was like, that's what it's about. Taking your moment, and it's a collective. You have this energy binding you together, and you're dancing, and you're also inspiring the audience. It was about that for them, and obviously you felt that.
Absolutely.
I loved hearing that.
Well, one of the things I'm curious about too is that, you're dealing with pretty young people. These are not
like 17. They're 17 and above.
Well, I mean, there are the dancers that, when I was referring to Alvin Ailey, some of those dancers are in their 20s, 30s, and, and older. So there's a lot of life experience in those dancers that your young people haven't quite had that chance to accumulate. And yet the sophistication of what they were able to convey. And I think it challenges my ideas of what young kids are capable of. And I think nowadays kids are getting exposed to so much earlier. Yeah. And I was in a conversation just the other day talking about when is the right time to introduce the idea of death to kids and mortality. And certainly in a couple of the conversations I've had, I just had a conversation with Miranda Viscoli, who heads up an organization called New Mexicans to Prevent Gun Violence. And they have their students are building art pieces out of gun parts. A lot of the kids in this class have been exposed to gun violence of their own fellow students, et cetera, et cetera. So it's such a different world that we're living in now with kids access to everything. And I feel like it's an interesting time to introduce new traditions in terms of how we prepare these kids for the world. And I feels like your dance approach and your choreography and just what you're teaching these kids is very consistent with that new way of teaching.
And look, it's not like then doing it on purpose. It just happened to be a response to the way we curate rehearsals and the way we coach and inspire the dancers. I also remind them too, like, it's not really about death, but dancers have an expiration date. At some point, our bodies just can't do what they used to, what we used to. I'm 53 years old and I'm still able to do certain things, but not at the capacity of, the way these kids can do it. So I tell them, I said, you have this instrument. And I remind you that, yes, I want you to be in the moment. I want you to really give all of yourself in that moment because of the amount of work you put into your instrument. But also, I want you to enjoy this time because although you're not thinking about it, when you're turning 35 and 36, things start falling apart. And so, like, you enjoy this. They have all this collagen in your body, and you're able to bend backwards and you're able to fall on the floor and not break a pelvis. And go to the floor and then not bruise yourself. Well, I'm bruised, and then get back up the next day and then do it all over again for 8 hours. I think the kids, you have to be wired a particular way to want to do this, especially dancers. But like I just say that with any athlete, a figure skater, I've been watching this Ilya Milinin, who's the quad god now, who's doing more quads in the history of the sport. Simone Biles from gymnastics, they're in there all the time pushing the boundaries. And I feel like I tell those stories to the kids. They failed multiple times. And I think the kids understand. So what I do when it comes to failure, how I frame it for them is that it's okay. Like if I'm not even upset about it, you shouldn't be. And I'm the director. But learn from it and fix it. But don't attach yourself to, and kind of worry about it and kind of sulk about it. I tell them it's part of the process. And there are failures in that full-length piece. There are failures in there that I couldn't address and fix because we didn't have time, but we made it work. So I remind the dancers that, like you have to have a bit of grit and the way you view what you're not doing, because there were times where like dancers were actually getting hurt not hurt, but they were so fatigued. I had one dancer that literally in the second week on Thursday, the fourth day of rehearsal, she had to step out because she was so exhausted. So I said, here's some electrolytes, just go over here. But she didn't want to step out. She wanted to keep going. And I said, I need you. I need for you to do this. You are not failing right now. Your body's telling you to rest. So rest and watch. And so I give them leeways and strategies to be able to understand you're only human. You push yourself, yes. But at the same time, also, like, I want you to take what you can give your all. And then if at a moment in time, if you feel like you failed and your body's given out, I also allow for them to understand that's part of the process and there's nothing wrong. And so I think it's important as a director, but also as a mentor, to understand how to deal with these kids too, like with these young dancers. We're not really kids, they're younger dancers. They're like, you're aspiring, but they have to also understand that they're not that they can't be superhuman, that their body is in a way an expiration date, like with a process. And so we always try to make it as supportive as possible and try to also not punish them. Like I don't believe in punishing my dancers. I believe in empowering them. I believe in allowing them to see what they could do past their limit. I always tell them, you think that you could only do this, but actually I see you do this, and here are the reasons why. And when I talk to them and they see, they connect the dots, all of a sudden they have a strategy to be able to go past where they think their limit is. And it's always a positive experience. We have our hardships, but we try to frame the way we view those hardships in a way where it's about the learning, and learning means you have to fail. It's part of who you are. And I think these different challenges, it's like teaching them these life lessons, but through the art form of dance, and it's happening in real time. And so I think that's why I feel I love what I do. There's so much challenge in it, but also been mentoring and teaching and choreographing now for a very long time. And so I try to take, it's just one thing that I did say to myself a long time ago, because I was also fell victim to some horrible processes. Like choreographers were so mean to me. Some of them were racist towards me. Some of them would shame my body. Some of them would tell me I wasn't tall enough. I was too bent like a gymnast and not a dancer. I mean, there were so many things thrown at me. Or I would work really hard on a process, and then and then they would say, great, great, great. And then they would come in a week later, like, that's not so good at all. And I would get so good. Like, it's just emotional abuse, And I promised myself that I would never, ever do that to my dancers, because I know how that felt like for myself. And I was not going to pass that neuroses on to the next generation. So it's a constant battle of looking at my own self to make sure that I'm treating them right, but also not treating them so right that I relinquish my own control. I still have to make sure that we are approaching, the company work at a particular standard, and the level that we have set for ourselves at Zeitgeist Dance Theater is very high.
Yeah. Well, again, a very important thing that you've just underscored is that one of the themes that we're exploring in this season is legacy, but not just legacy like, what we leave behind, but sometimes it's an interruption of a negative legacy. And having come through the dance universe myself, that all of that negative programming and that way, that everything you just described is one of the main reasons I think my family discouraged me from becoming part of the dance world. It was a vicious, especially for classical ballet. And,
Yeah.
especially with the body shaming, especially with just the pushing yourself beyond the limits, but without any of the positive support. And, the combination of interrupting that legacy and also interrupting another thing I was thinking about when you were talking about is we live in a world where, HGTV shows you 20 minutes while you were away and your house gets completely redone. And the focus is so much on the final result and does not show the messy process to get there. And these kids are living at a time of social media. It's everything
That's
is
what Instagram is.
Yeah.
They only show the great stuff, but they have no idea what it took for them to get that picture. Or, I have friends that curate and have millions of followers. I have friends in the dance where they have millions of followers. They curate the experience of their Instagram. They will never show the ugly stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you're not going to show that? I think that's interesting. No, I would never do that because it's not their quote unquote brand.
Right.
And so people don't seem to understand that what they're seeing there is not real. It's curated specifically to promote an idea that, although it is marketable and fun and people buy into it, it's not authentic because you're not seeing how they're getting that particular video or product or image when they post it on their social media feed. So it's interesting because about ballet, I was a little bit controversial because I was one of the first people to say, if you do class and you're taking ballet, you're a ballet dancer. Not a ballerina, because a ballerina is a particular level, but you're a ballet dancer. And that used to upset people in the ballet world. And I'm like, well, what's the matter with calling somebody who takes a ballet class a ballet dancer? I'm not calling them a ballerina because a ballerina is on a whole other level. I'm not insulting the art form in that way. I'm just calling it. And I say that to the kids, if you're taking a ballet class, even if you're a hip hop dancer, you're a ballet dancer. And I would say to them, here's the thing. I could care less about how you're built, the color of your skin. I care more about your approach to this art form, which is unforgiving because it teaches discipline and tenacity. But here's the thing that I always tell them. It doesn't matter to me what your body type is. If the ballet vocabulary and vernacular speaks clearly in your body, it's a big win for you. Because some of my dancers, although they are not the ideal body type, when they take ballet and they come to my class and I teach company class, they speak it so clearly that you have no choice but to pay attention to them. And I think it's breaking norms. I have a friend of mine who I dance with the Philadelphia Dance Company. She danced with Alvin Ailey for a long time. Her name is Hope Wigan. And, she's shorter. She has a shaved head and she's built more stocky. And in fact, she auditioned for Judith Jameson 8 times. And she wouldn't take her because she said, you need to lose weight. But Hope, oh my goodness, when she dances, power, grace, sophistication, there is, her lines are exquisite. She can do anything. She could turn, she could move fast. So, everything about her, there was a refinement and a finesse and a command in her presence that you have no choice but to pay attention to her. In fact, she won the Bessie. The Bessie Award is like one of the New York dance community nominates certain, choreography and dancers, and she actually got for outstanding performer. And that was for the Philadelphia Dance Company. She wasn't even hired by Alvin Ailey. And even after winning the Bessie, Judith still would not hire her. But the New York Times did a piece on her in 2002 about basically breaking body norms. That someone like this could break the norm where she is recognized. There are exceptions made for her because she can do these incredible things with an unideal body type, but she was able to do it. And so I always tell the kids, she always worked, so hard at making sure that her technique was as refined as possible and working against a body that does not receive the information naturally. She had to really work on that. And she triumphed over it. She became a principal with Alvin Ailey. In fact, she's choreographing for them now, many different pieces. So I always tell the kids, it's about the clarity of what you do with your instrument and not what you've been given genetically. So trying to change and reframe the way that works for them. And it's been helping a lot because instead of the kids seeing flaws, they're seeing possibilities.
We're going to pause here for a moment to speak to our listeners. If you like this content and want more information on our guests, their projects, and more in-depth ways to engage with us, you can find us on artbridgenm.org or our ArtBridge Substack. Please read, follow, and share our content. Your subscriptions, shares, and contributions help us grow our artistic community. Thank you, and now back to our conversation.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. So as a choreographer, I'm curious, so you just mentioned using your body as a dancer as the instrument, and then the choreographer who is actually creating, it's like the difference between a composer and a musician. Speak to being a choreographer a little bit, because one of the themes that I'm trying to promote here is like how we can become the choreographers of our own life. So what are the components to being a choreographer and a curator?
First and foremost, obviously, to become a choreographer, you have to be a dancer. I think, in my opinion, at least, okay, so I'm going to speak my own truth, because there are a lot of choreographers out there that don't have dance experience, but I'm going to speak my own process. I'm speaking solely for myself and not for a general group of people. I started late when I was 19, and I was supposed to go to the University of Washington. I was there on a full scholarship to become an engineer. I decided that I didn't want to do calculus backwards. So I ended up I dropped the class. I said, I don't want to do this. I ended up taking a dance 101 class and an art 101 class. And actually, after taking one semester each, like they both were like, do you want to major in this discipline? And I'm like, I'm not sure. I went and saw a dance concert by an Israeli choreographer. His name is Zeitgeist. It was called Dance for Seven, and it was a ceremony of carols by Benjamin Britten, but it was not a Christmas piece. It was about death. Oh, I mean, even when I talk about it, I get teary-eyed, because that single performance single-handedly changed my life. I'm like, I got to do this. And so from then on, that's what I decided to pursue. Fast forward, right? So I danced for the Repertory Dance Theater, which is a repertory company, the Philadelphia Dance Company, which is another repertory company, Ballet Pacifica, which is a repertory ballet company that did, nutcrackers, some classical work, but mostly contemporary work, and then the California Ballet. And then I also danced with the National Choreographers Initiative, which is another repertory company that is assembled in the summer in California. So if you look at all of my company experience, I was a rep dancer, which means I was really good at a lot of different things, but a master of none. Like, where if you look at somebody from the Graham dancer, they are masters of the Graham technique. If you look at somebody at Alvin Ailey, they are masters of the Horton technique. If somebody dances with the Jose Limon company, they are masters of the Limon vernacular. I was a rep dancer, and I did all of that. And so the way I work as a choreographer is the influences of my life experience, both as a rep dancer, but also the thing that's so interesting is that I actually choreograph mathematically. And I wish that you have a visual of this, because I could show you my book. And this is like all my projects. I work like an engineer.
Oh, wow.
You see the numbers?
Yeah.
When you look at the different patterns, I have a notebook, and I literally work like an engineer. I diagram my movement patterns. I can't diagram my movement. I videotape it. If I have a phrase that I want to create, and I work with this book to try to make sure that I put things in order. I sometimes will count music, sometimes I won't. It depends. But the biggest thing for me as a choreographer is always coming from my life experience. And recently, I've been researching more about my Filipino identity. So the next work that I'm doing is about this energy called kapwa, which is the love and the soul and the warmth of my island people. And so trying to figure out Filipino music with that, infusing it with more modern music. So I'm doing those things. But as a choreographer, I'm speaking my truth and my life experience as a dancer, and the aspects that I draw upon: music, life. Believe it or not, being in Santa Fe inspires me. I go outside and I feel the energy of this place. In fact, it's so funny because when I moved here in 2017 from Los Angeles, I had to fire my agent. My agent was like, if you move out of here, you're done. Your career is done. Guess what? I moved here to Santa Fe, and my commissions and my work quadruple. Why? Because I am no longer sitting in traffic 4 hours a day. I took that time and took a deep breath and really, really journaled, figured out what I really liked, not trying to be trendy like everybody was trying to be trendy in LA, figure out who I was as a choreographer, the person in me as a dance maker. And those are the aspects that have guided my process. Although my process definitely is influenced by, I was also a gymnast for a long time, for 8 years before I became a dancer. There's a physicality and a drive. There's a passion and a fire in my work. I'm also very much sensitive. A lot of the times, like, people are like, how do you understand, how to choreograph on female identifying dancers? Like, I'm not at all ashamed or shy to access my feminine side and access the romantic capacity of me and how I listen to music. And then the physicality part, more male energy, is the athleticism. So I combine those two aspects with that mathematical mind, but also having an open heart, having an empathetic capacity to my being, and allowing for all those factors to come into play when I create. So always when I do something, always speaks my truth in that moment. I never allow a trend or something that's hot right now to influence my work. I mean, I'm aware of it, yes. I'm aware of what's happening in the world. The name of the company is Zeitgeist, it's just out of the time. So I had to be aware of that. But I always try to speak my truth, and it's been working for me.
So I want to go back when you said that you were a repertory dancer and you're learning all these different techniques, Graham technique, Alvin Ailey, whatever. Would you say that those are kind of like learning different languages, and that kind of
learning
incorporate
different vernaculars? Yeah, and I think because I learned so many different pieces of work with different styles, and the processes of all these choreographers were so different. Like I said, some brilliant, some inspiring, some unhealthy. I take all of that and formulate my own process. And the weaving piece really was a reflection of how I work. It was mathematic, there's pattern, there's emotion, there's storytelling, there's like that it was like almost as if I unleashed everything that I was about in that work. And you told me you felt the truth there. You felt, and that's because that's where it comes from for me. Like, I never ever come from a place when I create trying to prove something. I used to do that when I was younger and nobody heard me. It was only when I started really accepting myself and understanding who I am and really digging into my inner voice and not letting the outside noise dictate or run or drive me. It's like I trusted myself, and that's what Santa Fe has done. So I get emotional thinking about it. Sorry. Like, that's what Santa Fe has done for me. It has made me quieter to be able to listen to this energy inside of me and this voice inside of me so that I could access that more when I create. When I was in LA, I was so distracted by trend, and so everybody's trying to be something and blah, 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 blah. And it used to upset me. I'm like, why are people doing this? Like, who are you? You know what I mean? And I would meet quote unquote friends. It wasn't until I got here where I really, really had a chance to understand how to slow down and to really understand who I am. And not Francisco, the persona, Francisco, the career, nothing to do with that. It's like everything that's coming out of me now, whether I teach it, it's just speaking my truth.
Well, what is so clear to me is that when you have that space to go into that deeply personal, you're tapping into not only the deeply personal, but the deeply universal, which is again why it works. Yes. And this is again it's such a perfect analogy for the purpose for this whole podcast, both season 1 and season 2, is trying to show the general public various different ways that by accessing our most deeply personal self, we have that universal experience, and artists provide for us so many different pathways to give us trailheads on how we actually access that. And one might think that it's a very me, because you're talking about my truth and my this, but it's such the opposite of that when you compare it to like the me of an LA.
Like you're going in to tap into a universal collective energy.
Yeah.
And that has been the driving force. It's so funny you're saying that, because when I hear you talk about it, I completely understand where you're coming from. I think what happens is that as human beings with social media, we are conditioned to think a particular way, that we have to be this and that we have to do this at this time, that you have to be this way by this age. and et cetera. Like we've been conditioned to think a certain way. And so by being here in Santa Fe, I have learned to really not allow for that outside noise to drive me, but to find my truth. Now, when I started doing that, I got scared. Why? Because I didn't know who I was. I had no idea. But all that was driving me was I knew that I loved dance. I knew that I loved music. I knew that I loved to create. Those are the three things I started with. And then from then on, like I just understanding, okay, here's how I work. Here's my processes. I used to be so judgmental about how I work, and I don't do that. And I'm like, wait, no, I can't say I don't do that. I have to be open to that. And this weaving piece, Lineage, really tested me because, again, it's not normally my wheelhouse. And yet it allowed for me to create a work that was potent, that was emotional, that was visually enticing, that there was architecture to that. So it really took all of my experience and what I've learned and showcased that. And because of that, it has now allowed for me to lean in even more about who I am and not being apologetic about it. And then what I have learned is that when I speak my truth, people listen. When I try to be somebody I'm not, nobody cares.
Yeah. Well, and it takes a lot of courage, and you're role modeling courage, and courage, which, has its root in the French word cœur, which means heart.
Yes.
And so it's being very heartful, mindful, heartful, and you're just doing it in spades. So I knew why I wanted to talk to you. I mean, you epitomize everything that we're trying to demonstrate here. And all of those kids, those Zeitgeist, I call them kids, young people and dancers are benefiting from that. And Santa Fe is so lucky to have you.
Thanks
really,
so much.
really.
I do want to say that we reached a pinnacle point in our company existence here because I want to announce that we have our Lenzig dates. We are finally performing at the Lenzig. Our tech rehearsals of July 1st, our August 1st is the date. And so we have worked so hard to get that, because, that's kind of like the pinnacle, right? Because that's where all the major dance companies perform. And not saying that performing at the Hispanic Cultural Center was not significant, because it was. In fact, it was the right venue for this Lineage piece. And then we had many beautiful performances at the NDI Dance Bonds, at the National Dance Institute Dance Bonds, and their black box space is also very magical. But I think this is an important hallmark for us, because not that we've never, you have a particular goal that you want to accomplish. And I feel like by being in that space, I feel like we really arrived, And so we're really excited to create, this new work. It's going to be 4 new works, and then 2 works from fellows that we have to still select for our New Century Dance Project Fellowship, which we had over 250 applicants from all over the world. I mean, I'm talking Mexico, Paris, France, Italy, of course, here local dance makers in New Mexico and the US, Canada, Israel, like from Batsheva, there are some artists. So it's going to be a tough decision by my panel to figure out who those artists are. But we're trying to make sure also that this year, an initiative to really involve more local New Mexico dancers to be part of our organization, because I want to be one of those organizations that really give opportunities to dancers here. So for our professional company that we're bringing in this time, we have about half the company is from local New Mexico. Either from Albuquerque or here, and the other half are from New York or LA. So we want to make sure that this place has done me it has done amazing things for me individually. I have to give it back.
Yeah.
So we're very conscientious of that. And so we're making it a point to really make sure that we integrate the talent here to be part of our company. And then the talent from outside, it's such a beneficial exchange, because the dancers here can see where they can go. And then the dancers from other places can feel that energy that I am so consumed and inspired by. So I think it's going to be a really exciting season.
Well, it absolutely will. And one of the things I was really impressed by, again, in that dress rehearsal, or the rehearsal that I saw, was there were some dancers there that had just come in from all over the world, really.
Yeah.
And so it's another way that you're enriching Santa Fe is by bringing these dancers from all over the world, and they bring a little bit of their multiculturalism to our Santa Fe, which is part of the reason Santa Fe is so magical, because we have our own diversity here of culture that goes back, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And then you're bringing in these new, really top-notch, not just dancers, because the people that you are forming are whole people. They're not just dancers, and they are bringing their whole selves here.
I always say person first, dancer second. That's how we nurture them. Because without the person in a dancer being nurtured, the dancers don't know who they are. There's no conviction. So we have to nurture them always. Their person within them is the priority. The dancing is underneath that. So not the other way around. The other thing that I wanted to say too, it's just I cannot wait to invite you again to another rehearsal, to a whole different slew of pieces, and have you see the performance again. It's going to be so exciting. We're really excited for this season. I think last year was a banner year for us, but it's like unleashing what I've learned from that very difficult and challenging process. And now seeing more things after that, the pieces that are going to be created now are going to reflect that growth. So,
well, thank you for your inspiration. Thank you for the invitation. I will definitely be there. Thank you for the inspiration. And thank you for this new legacy that you're creating around the dance community in Santa Fe. It's beautiful.
I'm humbled. Thank you. And thank you for giving me an opportunity to be part of this incredible podcast. I mean, it's just like talking about art process, talking about the truth, this collective energy that binds us all, that sometimes we don't understand how to nurture and access. But Santa Fe has definitely made a huge difference in the way I see that collective energy, in the way I access and relate and learn from it. So, and I cannot even believe that you said that, because I thought maybe I'm crazy. But the mere fact that you're saying that, I'm like, wow, there is really something special in this place, and people understand this language. So thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well, we will be back in touch soon. I want to get that rehearsal on my calendar. And thanks again for joining me. And I will see you soon.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye-bye.
So thanks for joining us today. ArtStorming is brought to you and supported by ArtBridge NM and listeners like you. Look for us on your favorite podcast platforms or wherever you listen. Your subscriptions, likes, comments, and shares help us to reach more listeners and attract the support we need to thrive in these challenging times. If you love what you hear, please consider making a contribution. We rely on your help to keep these conversations going. Every dollar you contribute goes directly into programs that support our mission. And we've been offered a matching grant that will match every dollar that you contribute. That means more compelling stories, more in-depth articles, and an even greater impact on our community. Please visit our website at www.artbridgenm.org, and thank you so much for being an essential part of our work.